dignitaries, ladies and gentlemen, may I call the third side event of the Geneva 2020 conference to order. Our distinguished guests, His Excellency Minister of Finance, Ms. Deborah Lanes, and those who are connected online with us, they all are here, so we can proceed. So I'm going to leave the floor to the moderator, Mr. Nazir Kabiri.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, excellencies and distinguished colleagues and participants. On behalf of the three co-hosts of the Afghanistan 2020 conference, namely Finland, UN, and the government of Afghanistan, and the co-organizers of this important side event, namely Ministry of Finance, USAID, and UNDP, I warmly welcome you to this official side event on economic priorities and aid effectiveness. For this conference, the Afghan government has presented a document called Afghanistan National Peace and Development Framework 2. Out of the three pillars presented in the ANPDF-II, this particular side event is conceptualized, linked to the pillar on market building. This pillar discusses the growth agenda anchored around the private sector, aid effectiveness, and regional connectivity. This side event will discuss economic priorities of the country that would help bring it back to a sustainable growth path, and discuss how aid and development assistance could be used more effectively. For these discussions, we have three sets of distinguished speakers and panelists. The agenda is that we first will have a high-level keynote speeches, followed by a panel discussion and interventions by the eminent responders already identified. If time allowing, towards the end, we'll have Q&A from the audience. Again, thank you for the participation, and I particularly would like to recognize members of the International Advisory Board on Economic Affairs to the President of Afghanistan, who are also observing this discussion. Now we move to the keynote speakers, and I first have the honor of introducing His Excellency Minister Abdul Hadi Argandiwal, who is the Finance Minister of Afghanistan, and he previously served as the Minister of Economy from 2008 to 2014, to perhaps start the keynote speeches at no more than 5 to 7 minutes on the economic priorities of Afghanistan. Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Kabiri sir. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Honorable Mr. John Barsa, Honorable Ms. Kenny Vignaraja, Honorable Member of the panel, distinguished delegates of donors, multilateral development organizations, civil society organizations, private sector representatives, and academia. Ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. A very good afternoon and good evening to you all around the world. Let me start by thanking you for joining us today despite of difficult circumstances. Let me also thank the USAID, UNDP, and my team in the Ministry of Finance for helping to co-organize this event, as well as for all the supports you have given them. I welcome the opportunity to participate and speak in this very important event today, even if only virtually. On behalf of the Afghan people and the government, I would like to extend our sincere appreciation to our donors and international development partners for their support thus far. Afghanistan is one of the countries in the world which heavily depends on foreign assistance for its development because of the imposed and senseless war on its citizens. The United Nations Human Rights Development Index ranks Afghanistan 170th out of 187 countries in the Human Development Index. Poverty, unemployment, illiteracy, lack of basic health service, lack of sufficient infrastructure, and most notably violence is still haunting our people, haunting our economy. The COVID-19 pandemic continued to take lives around the globe. Its serious economic and social impact are yet to be continued, and it remained the Afghan government's highest priority to address its consequences. There are, of course, other priorities and ambitions for the future of Afghanistan, as articulated in the second version of Afghanistan National Peace and Development Framework in ANPDF-II. Ladies and gentlemen, one of the main objectives of the foreign aid to Afghanistan has been to help the country to achieve sustainable economic growth and self-reliance. Although foreign aid has been effective in the raising Afghanistan's per capita income from 179 US dollars in 2002 to $502 in 2019. School enrollment has increased from 1 million in 2001 to 9.2 million in 2019. Access to clean water increased from 22% to 50% of population. Maternal mortality has more than halved since 2001. However, aid in some cases have had probably unintended consequences. A major danger of a state's confined reliance on foreign aid is that when aid money stops, the state faces political and economic instability and regresses toward poverty, unemployment, and insecurity. The recent decline in aid money, withdrawal of international security forces, and the negative impact of the global pandemic result into Afghan state's reliance on scarce domestic resources and an alarming rise in poverty, unemployment, insecurity, and corruption. In the current situation, it is critical that the international community remain committed and simultaneously support the Afghan government in sustaining its economic growth through to 2024. As we have prepared our self-reliance strategy through which we will strive to finance our operating budget by 2025 from our domestic resources, and until that time we need strong technical and financial support of the development partners. We need to plan and implement development intervention collectively and responsibly. For Afghanistan, of course, aid has not been just about building the economy and improving social indicators. More existently, it's about building and maintaining peace and stability. I would like to call on the development partners to pledge for the coming years to the government of Afghanistan, which will help us to continue to move in the direction of self-reliance. Aid effectiveness in Afghanistan has lately been a national and international topic of debate. In fact, there are serious concerns around the effectiveness of aid inflows to Afghanistan, such as lack of sufficient coordination, fragmented implementation, and insufficient transparency and accountability. Mechanism in community engagement in development policy and economic decision. Aid is most effective when it supports a country-owned approach to development. It is less effective when aid policies and approaches are driven slowly by donors and third-party implementing agencies. The second version of Afghanistan National Peace and Development Framework, ANPDF-II, the national priority programs in exercising effective leadership over its development policies and strategies. The government will coordinate the effort of various development actors working in the country and give the ownership to Afghan, which increase aid effectiveness. Poor coordination of aid increases the cost of delivery both for the donors and partners countries and significantly reduce the real value of aid. Furthermore, it can put additional fiscal burden on the government to operate and maintain progress. Harmonization of aid delivery procedures and the adoption of common arrangement in using the government PFM system help reduce duplication of effort and lower the transaction cost associated with the aid management. Aid effectiveness can be enhanced when donors use common arrangement to manage the delivered aid in support of partner country priorities. A good mechanism of aid coordination can be described as one that has shared objective and integrates the various interests of stakeholders. The Afghanistan Partnership Framework is defining the joint portfolio review, which will ensure the alignment of the aid. Under the new Afghan Partnership Framework, we expect to agree with our development partners on the following 4 principles of effectiveness development cooperation that form the basic of the global partnership for effective development cooperation. 1, country ownership. 2, a focus on result. 3, inclusive partnership involving the full delivery of actors in the country. 4th, and transparency and accountability to citizens. With this, I conclude my remarks and thank you very much. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, Minister Argandiwal, for presenting the economic priorities of Afghanistan as being reflected in the ANPDF-II and the importance of aid management and aid effectiveness. And now we move to our second distinguished keynote speaker from USAID, who is John Barsa. the acting deputy administrator. Mr. Barsa previously worked as the Department of Homeland Security, where he was the acting assistant secretary and later as the principal deputy assistant secretary. Mr. Barsa, the floor is yours.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Kabiri, for that introduction. I'm honored to be here. Many thanks to everyone participating in this conference, and a special thank you to Minister Argandiwal and Assistant Secretary General Wigna Raja. Before I begin my planned remarks, I want to state clearly that the United States joins the international community in condemning the deplorable, indiscriminate attacks that occurred in Kabul on Saturday. We send our deepest condolences to the Afghan people, the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan, and to all those who have suffered from terrorist violence. I'm glad that we can all come together in these challenging times to talk about the path to a more peaceful, secure, and prosperous Afghanistan. For those of you seeing the news about changes in U.S. troop levels and fearing a lessening of commitment to the people and future of Afghanistan, let me assure you that nothing can be further from the truth. Our commitment remains steadfast. Let me be clear. The people and government of Afghanistan have a true partner in the United States. USAID believes that economic development, transparent institutions, and good governance are essential for peace. We are committed to working hand in hand with the government and with the private sector when it comes to human development and peace building. And today, I'd like to share with you some of the priorities and beliefs that will shape our actions in Afghanistan. We share many of the same goals as the Afghanistan National Peace and Development Framework. The framework puts an emphasis on self-reliance and increasing the economic welfare of the people of Afghanistan. And at USAID, we have a similar principle. We call it the journey to self-reliance. This belief orients our work around helping nations transition from those who receive aid to independent, enduring economic partners. This perspective is reflected in USAID's work, not just in Afghanistan, but across the world, as we help build the capacity of our partner countries to address their own development challenges. And the linchpin to achieving self-reliance is a vibrant private sector, one that is free, open, and inclusive of all aspects of society. We're thankful to many of you here today, the Afghan government and the international community. You've done some heavy lifting in this area already. You've laid the foundation for economic growth and private sector development by supporting policy reform and developing market opportunities that make it possible for Afghan businesses to succeed. And now we must engage the private sector in meaningful dialogue to discover those areas where interests collide. Neither the government nor donors can solve Afghanistan's socioeconomic challenges without the partnership and engagement of the private sector. Entrepreneurs know how to see opportunities and not be dissuaded by risk. They know how to calculate risk and how to find success. From innovation to job training to service provision, there are multitudes of opportunities for growth and profit in Afghanistan. We are excited to be part of this historic moment. Enterprise-driven, market-focused development accelerates the journey to self-reliance. We've tested this out and have seen great results in Afghanistan. For example, in USAID's partnership with the Kandahar solar plant, while electricity is obviously crucial for homes and industry, neither we nor the Afghan government have the resources to meet current needs, let alone grow or sustain capacity. To remedy this, USAID funded the Kandahar solar plant with $10 million alongside a private investor that matched that amount to build, own, and operate the first ever photovoltaic power plant. The government now buys the electricity from the company that runs the plant and uses it to power the country. The successful completion of this project sent a clear signal to the private sector that Afghanistan is open for business. The result was 4 additional USAID projects in renewable energy. All of these projects are fulfilling the objective of economic growth and sustainable development by bringing private partners together with the government. USAID also continues to build on gains made for women and girls over the past 2 decades. In 2015, USAID launched the agency's largest bilateral women's program in Afghanistan, which trained over 90,000 Afghan women leaders. The program has provided them the skills, networks, and opportunities to better engage in business, government, and civil society. Afghanistan's future peace and prosperity depends on building a society inclusive of women. If women are kept from contributing to the economy, it will stall the economic development of the country as a whole and its journey to self-reliance. But there's more that can be done. One of the top concerns of private sector investors in Afghanistan is corruption and burdensome administrative processes. These issues need to be addressed if Afghanistan has become an economic hub as envisioned in the Afghanistan National Development Plan, particularly as highlighted for the energy and mining industries. There's a real need for effective policies that counter corruption. At the same time, we need to support the government of Afghanistan as it grows the skills and income of its people while expanding services and advancing the rights of women and minorities. The private sector can also make a critical contribution in this effort that is good for their bottom line, as well as for national development. These actions will increase the country's chances at sustained international support and a durable peace. This trifecta of Afghan government, the private sector, and international assistance will be key to Afghanistan's self-reliance. USAID, the U.S. Development Finance Corporation, and the rest of the U.S. government are poised to respond. And we invite you to join us in this response. This is how we will support the Afghan people's efforts to transform the future of their country, to make it known not for conflict, but for concord, and renowned just not for the challenges it has endured, but for the prosperity it enjoys. Together with all of you, the United States remains committed to our enduring partnership with the Afghan people and their government as we strive to achieve this vision. Thank you so very much.
For a very enriched comments and statement recognizing ANPDF and importance of self-reliance based on the market-focused private sector-led growth, and also recognizing the role of women and girls. Of course, USAID and US has been a steadfast and generous partner of the new Afghanistan, supporting the country with blood and treasure. I thank you for that. Now we turn the floor to UNDP's Ms. Vinagaraja, who is the Assistant Secretary General and Director of the Regional Bureau for Asia and the Pacific for the UNDP. Your Excellency Vinagaraja, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So, Excellencies, Ambassadors, distinguished guests, on behalf of the co-organizers, the Afghan Ministry of Finance, the US government, and UNDP, let me sincerely thank you for joining us at this session. Let me also recognize His Excellency, the Minister of Finance, Argandiwal, SRSG Lyons, and USAID Acting Deputy Administrator Barsa. We know there's never been a more critical time to invest in Afghanistan's development. The recent violence and tragic loss of life is deeply disturbing, and our deepest condolences to families who have lost loved ones. The shocks of conflict and climate and COVID-19 have set back the country's economic growth and human development potential by several years. For the first time in 30 years, Afghanistan's Human Development Index is set to decline. And it is against this backdrop that Afghanistan is still a country determined to find a way out of war, out of halted development. This needs its people, its leadership, its partners, all pulling in the same direction. So let me be very direct. We cannot all be doing the same as we have been doing for years and expect a different result. We have to change our mindsets, what we strategically commit to, and what we invest in. So I wish to share 5 levers of lessons learned that are moving this pivot and can further do so on a different scale. And I hope they resonate with you. First, public finance and ODA must continue and must better leverage private investment, both domestic and international. An SDG-focused engagement of the private sector, working with the public sector, can help redirect market value to create the jobs needed at scale and to meet this development financing gap. We have worked the costings and options with government, and the continuation of valued ODA remains critical And it also then attracts and helps to de-risk private capital to invest in both the physical and social infrastructure the country needs. The second lever is addressing the intensity of climate and environmental vulnerabilities facing the country. This has to be central to the response. Afghanistan remains one of the most vulnerable countries to climate change, and at the same time, one of the least equipped to deal with its consequences. So, for example, a clear transition, and a fast one, to renewable energy will be a game changer. Third, investing in people first, both their learning, capabilities, and ensuring social protection when things get really tough, ensures that the bottom does not fall out. This is beyond education and also calls for a basic income that helps keep people afloat and families afloat. This has been proven to keep the worst from happening and to avoid collapsing societies. I hope this is something that we can implement together. A fourth lever, and a big part of sustaining peace and progress, is to invest in the role and aspirations of women and girls. Without this, we can just forget about it. The core values that hold a society together implode. So the hard-won gains for women must be preserved and expanded. And finally, continuing to invest in public institutions and the larger governance agenda cannot be overstated. Capable and mature institutions to help Afghanistan agree on and adopt the right policies and regulations, implement and oversee them, will also move towards that much-needed stability that resets the social contract between a state and its people. And it signals an investment-friendly climate for development that is much needed going forward. The rule of law and institutions of justice have to work and work well. So the bottom line, from a UNDP perspective, is that we must shift together to a development vision and fundamentals. Afghanistan's investment in sustainable development is one that may still face the reality of conflict and uncertainty. So this means a risk-informed development that cannot play second fiddle anymore, but must work with a sense of urgency. And we can do this. Thank you.
Great messages, Ms. Vignaraja, and extremely important points being delivered, particularly on the importance of the ODA and SDG-focused development agenda and the importance of development financing. And we believe in Afghanistan, and as reflected in the ANPDF, I feel that the SDGs are having greater financing appeal moving forward. And of course, the importance of climate change and investing in people and in women. And lastly, the importance of the institutions. Thank you very much for this really helpful comments. With this, we move forward to our panel discussions. And before that, I also wanted to recognize the participation of Her Excellency SRSG Deborah Lyons, as I couldn't see the room and the panel, and those of you on the dais. And at the same time, I also see participation of His Excellency Minister of Trade of Afghanistan, and we thank you, Your Excellency, for your participation in this important discussion. Moving forward with the panel, we have a number of key questions, perhaps posed by the co-organizers, and that are, what are Afghanistan's economic priorities, and how can effective aid planning and partnership move Afghanistan away from donor dependence and towards a greater self-reliance through incorporation of private sector-led economic growth, trade, and regional connectivity. And for this panel, we will go in the same order as set in the agenda. And first, of course, is UNDP's His Excellency Abdullah Al-Dardari, who is the UNDP's resident representative in Afghanistan. Mr. Al-Dardari, who served previously as the senior advisor on the Middle East and North Africa at the World Bank. Al-Dardari, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Just checking. Okay. Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be with you tonight. And let me start by saying that as we are working towards implementation of the ANPDF and setting the priorities for a private sector-led economic growth and development in Afghanistan, we need to make sure that we have, at the moment, the right social protection networks that can protect the people and empower them and allows them to benefit from all the work that we will be doing together in order to build the markets, build the market space for Afghan products, and to create the Afghan middle class that owns productive assets and has access to finance and other tools and skills. So if I may, just to show you what we have on the screen. Yes, so this is, okay, yeah, sorry about that. Yes, here we go. Perfect. So what we are trying to say is that as we need to build the future of Afghanistan in the next 4 to 5 years, also to 2030, we are now in the decade of action for the SDGs. UNDP is the SDG integrator in the UN system, and one of the major tools UNDP has now is the SDG financing. So in order to build the market building approach of the ANPDF, market building priority, we will be working together with the government and the private sector and the banking sector on SDG finance and ensuring access to innovative finance to the Afghanistan economy. Also, however, at the moment, because of conflict, COVID-19, and the impact of the global economy, which caused a redress in poverty and hunger and all other SDG indicators in Afghanistan, we are proposing a package of social protection networks, such as providing universal enrollment for girls in schools. That would cost 1% of GDP only. Public works programs for 100 days for men and women in the working age. That would cost 1.3% of GDP. We are thinking also, we are proposing a social pension to 1 million people over 65 years of age for 6 months. That would cost less than 0.5% of GDP, plus a cash assistance to about 500,000 IDPs and 300,000 returnees. That would cost 0.35% of GDP. All of these interventions would cost less than 3.5% of 1 year's GDP. That's about $625 million. This is almost 14% of donor grants in 2019 and compares to nearly $6 billion of annual expenditure on security. We need also to make sure that the hard gains that women have achieved in Afghanistan should not be lost in the way forward. And if we look at this is the positive or the optimistic scenario of ANPDF-II. And that optimistic scenario of the economy and the fiscal situation of Afghanistan clearly hinges, as the ANPDF states, on a much more active role for private investments, FDI, and domestic investments. Now, if we look at the public-private partnership proposal by the Ministry of Finance and the Office of the President of the $4 billion pipeline of projects, we see clearly that if we actually invest and translate these ideas and these investments into reality, we will have an average increase, annual average increase in projected GDP growth about 1.7% annually. This is a very important improvement compared to the baseline scenario. This is very considerable. And if we look at the impact on SDGs, we see that if you look at the right-hand side of the presentation of this slide, you will see a very important improvement in SDGs as a total, a 2.3 percentage points compared to the baseline scenario, and you will see a 12%, more than 12% improvement in poverty reduction. This is a very important contribution. So private investments will lead to a very important improvement in reduction of poverty, which should be our main goal. At the same time, you will see a dramatic improvement in infrastructure because the structure of these investments move mainly towards infrastructure. And that will have negative environmental impact. And as you can see in goal 12, and therefore it is very important that what UNDP is doing now of providing the government with the necessary tools to do the trade-offs and understand the policy trade-offs. Now, development is not just investment. We assumed that the support from the international community and the commitments of the Afghanistan government to improving governance, improving management of public finance, reducing and fighting corruption, we added those elements and added them to the $4 billion of investment in the form of total factor productivity. And we will have a dramatic increase, an annual increase of 5.2 percentage points in GDP throughout the period 2021-2024 until we see that this improvement captures, in fact, higher growth rates than the ANPDF had projected, if only we improve governance. Now, the impact on SDGs remains very positive, but you will see that the total impact on SDG is a little bit less than the previous scenario. And that is easily explainable by the fact that this dramatic increase in GDP growth, production and consumption will lead to a very negative impact on the environment. And therefore, again, we need to make sure that the government has the tools to look at these policy options and assess these trade-offs and decide where do we want investment to go and how do we want them to go. In fact, we forecasted that these $4 billion of private-public partnership investments would lead to an increase of more than $8 billion in Afghanistan's GDP by 2030. This is dramatic in an economy of $20 billion today. This is the transformative changes that we need to work all together. And therefore, the idea of using ODA to leverage and crowd in private sector investments will be central in economic thinking and social thinking and environmental planning at the same time. What we are looking for is what we call the three-point bottom line. Not only growth, but growth that is environmentally sustainable, that is equitable and socially empowering to every young woman and man in Afghanistan. So what we are suggesting for the way forward, for UNDP to work with all of you, is first, is to ensure that these social protection measures are taken and implemented at the short run towards a universal basic income system in the medium term, is to work together to provide access to the middle class, access to productive assets and redistributive policies, and access to finance. 2, 3, create an ecosystem for SDG finance. the regulatory, the macro policies, the monetary policies, the fiscal policies that encourage SDG finance, banking policies, financial sector policies, all of those are very important, and we will support the government. Identifying product space. We now need to go into using big data, understanding and analyzing market space and products and potential markets through mainly regional cooperation. Our assessment is that through improvement in trade between Afghanistan and its neighbors, Afghanistan can gain 4 percentage points of GDP growth. And at the same time, as I said before, this negative impact of the environment needs to be integrated. So we have to have an integrated approach which has a 3-point bottom line: economic, social, and environment. This is what UNDP will be working on. We will be working with the government, the private sector, and donor community at the macro policy level, at the meso institutions level, and at the micro level, working at the local community and decentralized level in order to support this transformative agenda that we just put forward. Thank you very much for this great opportunity.
Thank you very much, Mr. Al-Dardari, for a very evidence-based and empirical presentation on the importance of PPP investments and also SDG financing linked with the market building agendas, and at the same time emphasizing the importance of good governance and also your references to the tools now available to the Afghan government for policy trade-offs and policy options. One feels really encouraged by the quality of the work that the UNDP is doing under your leadership. And now with this, we move to the World Bank's Henry Kirali, who is the World Bank Country Director for Afghanistan, and the World Bank being the largest multilateral partner to Afghanistan, fully aligned and on budget. But at the same time, the World Bank is managing Afghanistan's loan, namely the ARTF. More importantly, the World Bank produces great quality analytical work available to the government of Afghanistan and also those of us in the research community. A part of your presentation, Your Excellency Kirali, if you could also possibly tell us what Afghanistan possibly needs to do to protect the hard gains already made and not reverse back. Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and I hope you can see my presentation. Yes? Okay. Thank you very much. First of all, Honorable Excellency Minister Argandiwal, all dignitaries, I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to present the World Bank's work in Afghanistan. First of all, to echo what Excellency Argandiwal mentioned, much has actually been achieved in Afghanistan over the past 20 years, starting from 2002. If we look at it from real per capita incomes, these have increased by 75%. Populations, in terms of also the proportion of secondary age children enrolled in secondary schools has increased, etc. So a lot of the development indicators that we talk about Afghanistan did achieve. However, one has to acknowledge that much of these gains have been due to grants, inflow of grants from donors. If we look at that in terms of the proportion of grants, 75% of public expenditure is from grants, 50% of the budget, annual budget, is also from grants. The security sector, 90% of that is from grants. Now, in terms of what these grants have been doing, I can talk about the core on-budget aid programs that are provided through the Afghanistan Reconstruction Trust Fund, or ARTF. We would recognize that about 90% of basic health services are provided through the ARTF. 90% of basic education services are also provided through the ARTF. In addition, community...
Dr. Kirali, if I could perhaps interrupt you, and that is with respect to the presentation. If you could perhaps share your screen.
Okay, which I was doing, but I will try again.
Sure.
Do you see anything on your side?
Not yet. Perhaps our technical colleagues could help with that.
Just a minute.
There you go. There you go.
Okay. All right, so I will move to the next slide. Apologies, I thought it was showing on your side. Nevertheless, despite all of this progress, COVID-19 has had quite a major impact on the economic challenges. As we know, output is now expected to decline by more than 5% in 2020, with growth only gradually beginning to recover from next year. The economic contraction will have a direct impact on incomes and on poverty. Per capita income, we expect, will decline nearly 10%. From our simulations, we also see that the poverty rate will increase, probably exceeding 70%. Data from the Ministry of Finance indicates that revenues have declined, probably by around 20% of the budgeted levels for 2020. Again, we expect that these revenues will begin to recover gradually from 2021 onwards. If we look at it from the perspective of the negotiations that are ongoing, we have to recognize that the path from a political settlement to a sustainable peace will require significant improvement in economic conditions, but this will be driven by aid support. The numbers, right now, we anticipate that 600,000 young Afghans enter the labor market each year. Half of them are women. The economic growth rate continues to be low, and unless we do something to increase that rate, it will be difficult to generate sufficient jobs. There continues to be inequitable access to services and opportunities, and this is reflected in major disparities, particularly in social outcomes. Women and girls are probably at the receiving end of this. Of course, there are issues with weak institutions and corruption that we've all talked about. Therefore, in order to go forward, we need to be able to expand economic opportunities, to provide former livelihoods for former militants, and to move the incentives away from violence. Also to expand access to services and infrastructure, and to support inclusion and address social fractures. Further progress will be required on the reform agenda to strengthen governance and to manage contestation over land, water, and other resources. Sufficient fiscal revenues will be needed to sustain service delivery and to maintain core institutions and support long-term growth. Now, we strongly believe that the private sector has a big role to play in this. We have seen that with restricted fiscal revenues, with low growth and job opportunities being limited as far as the government is concerned, it is really the private sector that will be able to generate the jobs that are needed. However, to do this, there are three conditions that must be met. First, there has to be a sustained macroeconomic sustainability. This is a precondition for private sector investment. We need to have a capable and empowered Ministry of Finance to manage fiscal policy and budgets to underpin growth. Adherence to macroeconomic policy is critical to generate confidence and to attract investment. Second, to address business environment constraints. Afghanistan right now is ranked 173 out of 190 countries in the Global Doing Business Survey. Coordinated and decisive action is needed to identify and address critical regulatory restraints to investment. The TRISEC mechanism presents an important opportunity to progress critical reforms through coordinated action between the private sector, government, and partners. We are very pleased to note that the Office of the First Vice President has agreed to champion the TRISEC initiative for Afghanistan. Third, we must help Afghanistan to mobilize key growth sources. In this, we see the extractive sector and the agriculture sector as being two of the most important. In the extractive sector, we have to ensure that there is policy and institutional stability. We have to articulate a clear vision for sector development and mobilize a small number of scalable but profitable or viable investments. For agriculture, there is need to expand the irrigation structures and to improve water management, to invest in land management systems, and to support the development of agribusiness and industrial parks. Now, on aid effectiveness, this really truly requires a partnership approach. There are responsibilities on the partners and also on the government. On the partners, we need to be able to provide adequate financial support to sustain development gains. This has to be transparent, predictable, and applies credible approach to conditionality. We should provide core support to programs that support government systems to build capacity and institutions. Finally, use of aid resources to support private sector investment through risk-sharing instruments. On the government part, there needs to be a clear statement of national development priorities, including a results framework, and this is well elaborated in the ANPDF-II. The government also needs to strengthen systems to safeguard resources against corruption, because the development partners always want to know that the funds, the grants that they provide, are efficiently being used. This will require the articulation of an anti-corruption plan and also a new PFM, a reform roadmap. We need to put in place, the government needs to put in place measures to attract private sector investment, including, as I mentioned earlier, a robust macroeconomic framework and business environment reforms. There needs to be an increased focus on implementation and delivery, because sometimes, despite the available resources, these funds are not being utilized or implemented efficiently, and the services are not getting delivered on time. The ARTF Partnership Framework and Financing Program for 2021 to 2024 reflects the donors' plans for a coordinated support to Afghanistan, at least in the medium term. Thank you very much. Kiitos, merci, vielen Dank, grazie.
Thank you very much to Mr. Kerali of the World Bank for emphasizing a number of important points, and that being the continuity of the grants, sufficient and predictable with rightly targeted conditionalities, and at the same time some really sound advice on the private sector investments that could turn into an engine for job creation and growth, and those conditionality and those suggestions and conditions that you have made. Moving forward, we have now European Commission's Jean-Louis Well, who is the acting director for Asia, Central Asia, Middle East, Gulf, and Pacific at the European Commission. Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, good morning, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues. I'm really delighted to be with you today to discuss economic priorities and net effectiveness. For the European Union, these two topics frame our partnership with Afghanistan for the achievement of its peace and development agenda. I will now say a number of things that will transitionally go very well with the previous speaker, because net effectiveness is at the heart of our cooperation that development partners have built with the Afghan government and is in the essence of the Afghanistan partnership framework, which has been agreed upon at this conference. Effectiveness is sort of a responsibility towards our taxpayers in Europe and everywhere, who provides the largest part of development funding for Afghanistan. Clear political and economic priorities are key to our partnership. We welcome the prominent place of the respect of human rights, the efficient use of funds, and the fight against corruption have taken place in our partnership framework and in the discussion in this conference. Tangible results in these fields will be a key element in our partnership. The possibility of more cooperation between the Afghan government and the private sectors has been widely discussed and illustrated. I'd like to use this opportunity to report back from the SAIDI meeting we organized together with the Asian Development Banks on 19th of November. During that meeting, we discussed the potential of widening development partnerships beyond the traditional cooperation between governments and grant donors. Our meeting showed that there is a significant potential to institutionalize the private sector as a new actor for a shared development agenda. What is new compared to previous discussions is the fact that Afghanistan can now showcase concrete examples of what is possible. And I'm glad that our meeting on the 19th November could help to bring these to a wider audience. An enabling environment and functioning institutions are key to driving sustainable economic growth in Afghanistan. Legal reforms to improve business climates, like the ones the government has begun to undertake, are also crucial. It is possible to increase trade and state revenues, as well as create jobs with relatively little public investment. Modernizing and harmonizing import-export processes, brokering for trade agreements with neighborhood countries, and implementing of existing trade programs, such as national export strategies, are ways to do this. These measures are not only effective, they are also relatively inexpensive to implement. Afghanistan has received an exceptionally high level of international support over the last 17 years that is hopefully about to be maintained thanks to the pledges to be announced tomorrow. However, the needs are great, resources are by definition limited, and such a level of international support will not last forever. We need to discuss which concrete objectives are the most urgent to achieve, how we can leverage our funds, how we can support Afghanistan in mobilizing its own resources to advance the country's development. In this context, today's discussion on prioritization and ad effectiveness is important and timely. We welcome that the Afghan government has recognized the potential of these measures, as well as its social obligation in the Afghan National Peace and Development Framework. However, we must not forget that the state and its institutions have a clear social mandate. Making sure that the basic needs of all citizens are met has to remain at the core of the Afghan peace, state, and market building effort. Let me conclude by saying that for the EU, combining aid effectiveness and economic priorities means focusing on projects that unite different positive attributes in common setup. For instance, in the energy sector, public-private partnerships can provide employment, services to those who need, and reduce the reliance on foreign aid. Our objective is to identify and implement projects that strike a balance between using funds strategically, attracting additional private development financing, and making sure that basic social protection continues to be guaranteed. I hope that our discussion today will prepare the way for closer cooperation in these matters. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Jean-Louis Well, for very important comments on the aid effectiveness agenda and the references that you have made to the Afghanistan Partnership Framework Agreement, a document that will come out of this important conference. And at the same time, reporting to us on the side event, which was held on the private sector. And most importantly, your strong references to the need for reform and good governance so Afghanistan can continue receiving the current level of development assistance. Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Now we are moving towards the Afghan Central Bank, and that is His Excellency Ajmal Ahmadi, the acting governor of the Afghanistan Central Bank. Mr. Ahmadi was previously the Minister for Industries and Commerce, and also a senior advisor to the President of Afghanistan on banking and finance. Your Excellency Ahmadi, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kabiri, Minister of Finance Argandiwal, Mr. John Barsa, Ms. Kani Wignaraja, well respected panelists and participants. Hello and good evening from Kabul. It's an honor for me to attend the Economic Priorities and Aid Effectiveness side event. I want to thank the organizers of this event for your efforts in making this meeting happen. I want to begin by providing an overview of the economic context in Afghanistan during this unprecedented time when the world economy is suffering, and Afghanistan is no exception. We are facing multiple challenges, including the COVID-19 crisis, the ongoing conflict, and the challenging economic environment. And as a result, the IMF forecasts that Afghanistan's GDP is expected to decline by 5% in 2020. Let me begin by describing our response to the COVID-19 crisis, which earlier this year was first identified. We outlined an immediate response within a longer-term approach to the crisis. First, we prioritized interventions in the healthcare sector. In particular, Afghanistan shut down large parts of our economies to prevent the spread and to buy time for our health sector to build capacity. I myself have come down recently with COVID, and I can assure others that prioritizing our health sector interventions was the right approach. Secondly, we launched poverty alleviation programs, including an immediate food distribution program in major urban areas, and more long-term partnered with the World Bank to implement a nationwide food distribution program. And third, we immediately realized that our macroeconomic situation would deteriorate and therefore identified the need to build fiscal and balance of payments buffers. We immediately contacted the IMF for an RCF distribution and began discussions on a new 3-year ECF program with the IMF, which was recently approved. Within this context, given our mandate, the Central Bank of Afghanistan has strived to ensure the stability of our macroeconomic environment. So let me highlight a few points here. First, in terms of inflation, we faced a one-time food price shock where the cost of food rose approximately 12% due to some of our border closures. However, it's since declined to single digits and is now well contained in line with our key objective of maintaining price stability. Secondly, we closely monitor our international reserves position, and fortunately, it has grown to more than $9 billion, which provides more than a year import coverage, and by all international metrics, we have ample reserves. Third, we have not faced significant exchange rate pressures over the past year as a result of declining imports that more than offset our decline in exports over the past year. And fourth, bank credit growth to the economy has remained sluggish in the face of political and security uncertainties, while some financial soundness indicators show a mixed picture of weak profitability and high NPLs, but sufficient capital and liquidity buffers on the other side. Moving forward, the central bank will continue to look to anchor inflation expectations within our mandate, strengthen the regulation of our banking sector, and deepen reforms to strengthen the monetary policy transmission mechanism. As we move forward, we're looking to now identify ways to strengthen the economic recovery. For example, at our last High Economic Council meeting, we approved a program that will provide support to small and medium enterprises and stimulate lending to the real economy. More broadly, the central bank will focus on its core mandate, but will also begin to take a look at a more holistic perspective of increasing the weighting of economic growth within our reaction function at the central bank. This will require two components. First, we must increase financial inclusion. Afghanistan remains an underbanked economy, and to expand financial access, we are pursuing some innovative strategies. This includes approving non-banking, non-branching regulations. And within this framework, we have signed an MOU to allow for banking services through an agent network of Afghan post offices, and we hope we can move towards implementation of this plan in 2021. We have also accelerated our progress on mobile money initiatives. At the beginning of the year, only half of Afghanistan's banks and no telecom companies were connected to our national switch at the central bank. Now, in conjunction with the World Bank, we have connected all of Afghanistan's banks to the national switch in the past 6 months, and will complete the connection of all telecom companies by the first quarter of 2021. We expect the volumes of transactions, therefore, to increase exponentially on mobile networks beginning by the middle of 2021, and this will help also with targeted social assistance programs moving forward. The second principle that our central bank is implementing is to better regulate the banking sector. The problem currently is that Afghanistan has the lowest percentage of loans to GDP in the world at only 3.5%. In other developing countries, this percentage could be as high as 40 or 50%. This is both a problem, but also provides Afghanistan with an opportunity. It means that Afghanistan's banking sector, with proper regulation, does have the capacity to provide more loans to our farmers, to increase farm production, to our traders to export more, to our industrialists to build more factories, and to our construction sector to construct more housing. Over the next few years, therefore, the central bank will look at mechanisms to support loan growth in a way that protects the safety of our banking sector. We expect that such reforms to support our banking sector will support economic growth, and that our progress on alternative financial payment systems will accelerate financial inclusion over the next few years, as it has done in a number of other developing countries. Thank you. This concludes my remarks, and thank you for allowing me to speak here today about the central bank's perspective on economic growth in Afghanistan. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency Governor Hadi, for your observations and remarks. You updated us on the monetary policy measures in Afghanistan's banking sector, and also your forward-looking agenda focused on the recovery with the lending facilities to the SMEs, and the forward-looking agenda that includes financial inclusion and mobile money, which will help make cash transfers to the social assistance programs rather than the meal or food distributions, hopefully in future. And also your very important references to the housing industry, which is the mortgage program, and could be another private sector agenda. Your Excellency Ahmadi, thank you very much, and we move forward with this agenda to our distinguished speaker from the Afghan private sector, and that's being Manija Wafiq. Ma'am, you are the co-founder and president of Afghanistan's Women Chamber of Commerce and Industry. There was some strong references by our development partners in support of the women business leaders and girls. The floor is yours. We are interested to listen to your remarks.
Good evening, everyone in Kabul and Geneva and other European countries, and good morning, colleagues in the US. Thank you very much to all our partners and most of the speakers emphasizing on the role of private sector and creating a better environment for the private sector to contribute as an equal partner in the development of Afghanistan. I would like to start with some numbers that are positive to some extent, because we have just finished collecting data on formal and informal businesses, women-owned in the country. This was the third round of identifying women-owned businesses, because the first round we started was 2015, and we presented the results at the Brussels conference in 2016. And at that time, we have had only 680 formal businesses that were identified. But today, as I'm talking, we have identified over 2,400 women-owned businesses that are formal and are functioning in the country, in all over Afghanistan, except 2 provinces. Those are Nuristan and Paktika, unfortunately. Majority of the 2,400 or more than 2,400 are in Kabul, Herat, Balkh, and Nangarhar, Kandahar, Bamiyan, and some of the northern provinces. Others have like a number of numbers like 5, 10, but at least that's good news. And they're in various sectors. That's another good news, that women have started businesses in various sectors in Afghanistan and have paved the way for the next generation to as well enter all kinds of sectors in the country, and not only bound themselves into traditional and handicraft sectors. With the informal businesses that we have identified, the number is over 54,000. We have collected data on more than 15,000 of them as individual, and the remaining are in groups. The formal businesses, they have created over 72,000 jobs in the country for both men and women. And majority of the informal businesses in the country are in agriculture, in handicraft, and clothing sectors. And again, the 2 provinces that we do not have any are Nuristan and Paktika. And to sum this up, is that our development aid partners, both government and international, we have not been very successful in reaching out to all the provinces of Afghanistan equally, and that would be one of the first and major recommendations that I would like to request everyone today, to please give attention to all the provinces of Afghanistan, regardless of whether they're secure or unsecure. If we go and bring development aid to those provinces, we will be able to bring peace and security as well, like we have done in other places in the country. On the priorities of the private sector, for them to better contribute in the economy, I would like to start with infrastructure. Infrastructure, especially electricity, is a major issue, has remained a major issue, and for bigger industries, it may not be very costly to run on generator, but for our SMEs and our majority of the industries, both owned by men and by women, are SMEs. And we need an immediate attention towards electricity in Afghanistan. Telecom services, though telecom services have $2.5 billion contribution in terms of investment in Afghanistan, and have created more than 150,000, 22% of them being women, and they are covering 28 million of the population, but the services are not enough for businesses. If you would like businesses in Afghanistan to function better and remain connected and remain updated with today's technology and with the world, as we are also talking about trade and regional connectivity, it's very important to improve the telecom services in Afghanistan. The third would be trade improvement, especially export. And with export, I would like to emphasize to our international partners that the National Exporter Strategy of Afghanistan and the Private Sector Development, NPP, are the good documents to work on, to align our programming with, and share the programs with the Afghan government in the private sector on a long-term basis to improve trade in Afghanistan. And in the trade, to break it down to smaller levels, it would be value addition and value chain improvement in agriculture produces, especially dry fruits, nuts, and some spices such as saffron that are unfortunately being exported not in a much of value-added manner, but more of a wholesale manner, and a lot of value do not remain in Afghanistan, unfortunately. Marketing and promotion for overall Afghan products. We need a very fundamental strategy in order to promote Afghan products in outside markets, and we would like to regain the market share that Afghanistan had in providing dry fruits, carpet, and a number of other products before 40 years ago. So in order to regain, let's work on a marketing and promotion strategy for our products. Removing corruption, very important. If we would like the private sector to flourish in this country, corruption is one of the major impediments. We need to work on it, and especially we need to work on a lower levels so they are supportive and they do not create issues on daily basis to our investors, businessmen, businesswomen in the country, and especially in the subnational levels. Simplifying and clarifying laws and regulations. We do have a number of laws and regulations, but there is a huge need for simplifying them and clarifying them, and training and awareing all the levels of the government employees in national and subnational levels, so they remain aware and supportive to our business people when they approach for any service that they need. If I come to aid effectiveness, especially for the private sector in Afghanistan, I would start with ownership, which is one of the basic principles of aid effectiveness. Ownership, still, that's something that lacks in Afghanistan. Unfortunately, Afghans, we are not given yet the right ownership that we should be given, and we are still seen as beneficiaries of aid. We are not seen as partners. I would like to urge at this point that we have come so far, and we can be your development partners. We can be development partners for the private sector. So let's work together, and let's make it more effective and sustainable. Your every dollar and our every dollar investment as an investment, and as well as the time that all of us are putting together. Long-term programming, research and evidence-based. Very important at this. I think we have come a long way, and at this moment in Afghanistan, we would like to see more long-term programming, and we would like to see emphasize on quality versus quantity. So let's focus on that. Strict monitoring and evaluation is important, and last but not the least, collaboration and sharing information is very important. That's another thing that's lacking, especially among our international partners. We need a platform, and I would echo our Minister of Finance earlier that we all need to have our data shared in one platform, geographically and as well as program-wise, so all of us could see who's doing what and where, so we all could equitably contribute to all the provinces of Afghanistan and all the people of Afghanistan. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Wafek, for being on time, at the same time making strong references to the efforts put forward by the Chamber, as well as on the challenges in terms of the electricity and telecom and the loss of value in the agribusiness value chain. And at the same time, your references to the importance of aid effectiveness and country systems ownership. That's very well received. With this, mindful of the time, and I'm checking with the organizers, provided we have started some 20 minutes late, we will be still having 5 minutes to our panelists, and that being our distinguished panel member from the AKDN, Michael Kocher, who has been the general manager of the AKDN based in Geneva, covering AKDN's multi-sector efforts across 20 countries. And AKDN has been an extremely invaluable partner to the support of Afghanistan's soft and hard infrastructure. Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Kabiri, with sincerest thanks to the organizer of this very important event today. I will read my remarks, please, in the interest of time. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is really an honor today to speak on behalf of the Aga Khan Development Network, or AKDN. We are wholly committed to our continued partnership with Afghanistan's government and the priorities it leads with great thought and resilience. We're one of the country's earliest investors, now over 25 years, operating both not-for-profit and for-profit institutions with a broad range of partners in the process, but always with a singular goal, Afghanistan's development. That's why we established Roshan Telecommunications, restored and run the Serena Hotel, founded the first microfinance bank of Afghanistan, and also the new public-private partnership, Badakhshan Energy, like Pamir Energy in Tajikistan, all examples of flagship economic projects that feature innovative partnerships, in addition to AKDN's numerous education, healthcare, livelihood, civil society, and cultural programs and institutions. I make today, please, 4 points. First, experience shows aid can and must address physical constraints, roads and bridges, telecommunications, energy, and other infrastructure assets, for cities, surely, but also for remote and underserved areas. Internal connectivity in the country is as necessary as links to external markets. And we must not neglect rural Afghanistan, so critical to stability and growth. The partnership approach here is simple, yet at times done too rarely. Meaningful engagement with communities, partners, not beneficiaries, on what they need, be it a bridge, a micro-hydel, access roads, or irrigation channels at the village, district, provincial, and even the cross-border level. Second, progress demands broader multi-sector programs. Partnering with smallholder farmers, for example, AKDN's agribusiness efforts further advance economic objectives. So too the planned extension to Afghanistan of our regional enterprise initiative, Accelerate Prosperity, supporting micro, small, and medium enterprise. Further, there are projects that might be defined as social or cultural, but are central to economic progress. Examples include the French Medical Institute for Mothers and Children, where we engage the Ministry of Health and the French government as partners. Our work too with a broad range of community groups through the Afghan Citizens Charter to underpin civil society. The development of the Baghi Babur and Chahil Satun Gardens and the Riverfront Project in Kabul, where we partner with local artisans, urban planners, and businesses towards enhancing quality of life and the local economy. The third key ingredient is consistency. Investors make decisions based on predictability, the reliability of rules and regulations. Afghanistan and its international partners should continue creating clear, consistent regulatory frameworks guided by the rule of law and transparency. This applies also to the governance and management of Afghanistan's many natural resources. Protecting its extraordinary natural environment and combating climate change are without question of utmost importance for sustainable, inclusive economic development. Community groups, civil society, must be at the table throughout. The fourth and final key dimension is, of course, people, the country's greatest resource. Major strides have been made, as noted today, in education across the past 2 decades, especially for women and girls, and this must continue. but the country needs far more qualified professionals: teachers and administrators, engineers and accountants, nurses and doctors, entrepreneurs and managers. This is why we invest in skills development, executive and vocational training, and education. Greater investment in education, including education technology, at all levels is critical, from early childhood development, too often neglected, to university postgraduates. As but one example, during the pandemic, the Aga Khan Foundation has partnered with the Afghan Ministry of Education and Afghan radio and television stations to support public education in remote areas. We also partnered with a range of private foundations in support of education in Afghanistan. Across these points, smart community-driven aid linked to local needs enables the private sector. Given the importance of public-private partnerships, donor partners should too remember that grants and blended financing encourage investment. These four building blocks, investments in connectivity and infrastructure, multi-sector development, regulatory consistency, and human capital, will spur growth and help the country look forward with confidence. All the more so when the full range of viable partnerships is viewed strategically and expansively, in country and regionally. Linked to all these themes, fully including women, individually and through public representative bodies, as well as through partnerships with women's associations, cooperatives, and collectives, is essential. Similarly, enabling a vibrant civil society alongside embracing the country's remarkable pluralism is key for economic development. Afghanistan requires an inclusive approach to civil society and all of its people to reach its extraordinary potential. Again, AKDN expresses its sincere thanks and appreciation for the government of Afghanistan's clear vision, bold ambitions, determined leadership, and continued partnership. Thank you very much. Mr. Kabiri, back to you. Thank you.
Your Excellency Michael Kocher of the AKDN, thank you very much for your insightful observations and comments and those remarks that you delivered in four key strategic areas, from the soft infrastructure to internal connectivity, importance of internal domestic value chains with the focus on rural Afghanistan, and at the same time the importance of SMEs and the cultural and educational work, and the archaeological work, the much appreciated archaeological work that the AKDN is doing, and the connectivity elements of Roshan, the soft element of connectivity in this mobile technology. At the same time, your focus much important on the sustainability of our development efforts, and the importance of climate change is well received, and investment in people and those of our women and girls. Thank you very much, Your Excellency. With this, now we move to this third segment of our agenda, and that's being the interventions and reactions by our responders. While I'm checking on the time, I will still go as per the time allocated in the original agenda, and those are the 2 to 3 minutes maximum for our already identified distinguished responders to perhaps share their comments. And first, as per the order in the agenda, we move with the U.S. State Department's Honorable Ambassador Curry, who is the Ambassador at Large for Global Women's Issues by the President of the United States. Your Honorable, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Am I coming through? Yes. Okay, great. Thank you so much to our esteemed speakers. It was an honor to be able to listen and hear the wonderful presentations on this timely and important discussion. So good morning, good evening, good afternoon to everyone around the world. And I'm thrilled to be able to represent the United States today to talk about the critical role that women play in developing Afghanistan's self-reliance and helping them on that journey, especially when it comes to economic growth, of which we see women as key drivers. As we're really proud of our partnership with Afghanistan, and I keep hearing that word, and I think it's a very fitting word, because partnership is at the core of our approach, whether it's in a more general economic growth context or in our women's economic empowerment. engagements. And it's at the core of the Women's Global Development and Prosperity Initiative, WGDP. It was, when we created WGDP, it was all about partnership. And we're proud that Afghanistan has been an early adopter and early and enthusiastic engager in WGDP. They were one of the first countries to sign up as a core group member for our recent global call to action on women's economic empowerment. And we see tremendous leadership coming from the Afghan government and from Afghan civil society and Afghan women such as Manisha, who are leading the way and really demonstrating to the world how strong, capable, and resilient Afghan women are. And one of the things that we get really frustrated with in our office and in talking to our Afghan colleagues and partners is the victim narrative that tends to dominate when we think about women's role in Afghanistan. And let me be clear on this point. I do want to echo Administrator Barsa and talk about our commitment to women and girls and how important it is. You know, we've worked for the past generation of women, with the past generation of women and girls, to help empower and support them and be partners with them in helping them develop their skills and return to public life in Afghanistan. And we've seen tremendous fruits of those joint labors that we've done together with the women of Afghanistan. And we continue to support you. Just know that we continue to support you and that we are deeply concerned, as you are, with the levels, excuse me, with the levels of violence that are currently taking place in Afghanistan. We know what this is about. We know that that people are trying to frighten you and trying to frighten the Afghan people and society. And we see this, these cruel and senseless attacks. And we think that the only people who will benefit, the people who seek to benefit from the use of violence, they are only degrading their standing with the people of Afghanistan. And we very strongly stand with the people of Afghanistan who reject violence and who want to move forward to a brighter and better future. And that's one that includes the full and complete participation of women in all sectors of the society. We know, everybody knows this now, almost everybody anyway, that when women are fully empowered to participate in a society, it is more peaceful, it is more prosperous, it is more successful. Democratic self-governance, the rule of law, and human rights are better able to take hold. And it improves the economic prosperity of the country as well as the security of the country. So that's why we take a holistic approach that incorporates women, peace, and security and women's economic empowerment into our engagement with our partners in Afghanistan. We're so proud to see the way that Afghan women have stepped up and into the public space, and we continue to work through this holistic and partnership-based approach with them. And we want to really keep that at the core of what we're doing as we move forward. And I think that it's really important for us, especially as we look at how we can support women as entrepreneurs in Afghanistan, something that is also at the core of our WGDP engagement, and especially the issue of access to finance. We think this is one of the critical ones. That's why we're working with the Development Finance Corporation, DFC, as well as USAID, and through our own direct engagement with the government of Afghanistan and with banks and others and civil society in Afghanistan who can make those opportunities available for women to build, grow, start, and scale their businesses. Thank you so much for the opportunity to participate today.
Thank you very much, Your Honorable Ambassador, for your encouraging words and strong words of support to the Afghan women. I'm not going to reflect on your comments provided as the responders. Those must be reflected by our distinguished panelists. So without further ado, I move on to the second responder, and that still is the 2 to 3 minutes time slot, and that being our distinguished responder from the EDB. Narendra Singh is the country director for the Asian Development Bank in Afghanistan, and Asian Development Bank being on budget with flagship programs on infrastructure and regional connectivity. Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Hope you can hear me. Okay, great. My points would be focused a bit more on regional cooperation and donor coordination. ADB has been quite active on regional cooperation side, and I would like to bring in this particular angle of regional cooperation into this discussion. We are currently at a point in Afghanistan where the country wants to be self-sufficient. We all agree with that. But this needs to be considered in the regional context where trade is a major driver of economic growth. We're living in a global economy, and we have to acknowledge that for a country to be self-reliant, it has to trade. It has to move goods and people. Our understanding is that over 50% of Afghanistan's trade is with its immediate neighboring countries. We find that the exports, if the exports increase, if Afghanistan's exports increase by just about 20%, it will result into an increase of about GDP increase of about 10%, and it will also increase the consumption levels. It will also increase the employment levels. Now, earlier this afternoon, there was a high-level meeting on regional cooperation, and one of the points that came out very clearly was that there's a complete agreement among all the partner countries that regional cooperation is important for peace and for economic development. So if we have such a strong agreement among all the neighboring countries and also the partner countries, what is stopping us from enabling regional cooperation? Let's take the example of trade in commodities and electricity. Yes, we do need infrastructure to enable the trade, but there are two aspects that need to be addressed. How do we fund the huge investment cost, and how do we enable the trade? How do we facilitate the trade? This requires a focused and continued efforts of the multilateral agencies as well as bilaterals working together, specifically in areas of identifying sources of funds, risk mitigation mechanisms, enabling structures that will lead to more PPPs, as what was mentioned by the EU and the UNDP today, and also ensuring social and environment-friendly interventions. My final point, and which is more of a question to the panel members, is about identifying a mechanism where different regional cooperation initiatives can be coordinated and can be synergized to focus on economic priorities. We have ADB's CAREC program. There is this CASA program. We also have the RECA initiative, and we have the Heart of Asia, and there are so many other regional cooperation initiatives in Afghanistan today. We need to have a mechanism in Afghanistan where we can bring all of these initiatives together in a cohesive and coordinated manner. It would be great if we can get some views from the people here on this particular meeting, as well as other people who would like to pitch in, about how we can create a mechanism for regional cooperation coordination in the country. Thank you.
Dr. Singru from the Asian Development Bank, very important points being made, and I can't resist not to emphasize those, the importance of the trade and the peace dividend that a trade and connectivity agenda might have for the Central Asia and South Asia region, and the power of economics for peace building. And those are very important, and the approach that you have laid down is extremely important and well taken. And also your final remarks with respect to how to bring synergies between all these different ongoing initiatives on the connectivity agenda. Very important. Thank you very much, Your Excellency. And now we move to another generous partner of Afghanistan, JICA's Nakazawa. Your Excellency, you have been the Senior Vice President of JICA and a member of the board. We are looking forward to your response.
Thank you, Chair. And I also thank all excellencies joining us today, and all keynote speakers and panelists for their excellent speeches and presentations. My additional intervention today is about the importance of the capacity development in order to make private sector-led growth possible. Capacity of each and every Afghan individuals, as well as that of society and government, need to be enhanced to create an enabling environment for private investment. And for this, Afghan government has a lot to do, and we partners have a lot to support. Let me introduce Ms. Sahar Hamdad. She is Deputy Minister of Construction Affairs of the Afghan Ministry of Urban Development and RAND. She had won JICA scholarship to study urban planning at Toyohashi University of Technology in Japan. She graduated there with a master's degree in 2015 and returned to Kabul to contribute to her country's development. The JICA scholarship has been provided since 2011 under the Project for the Promotion and Enhancement of the Afghan Capacity for Effective Development, or PEACE in short. In the last 10 years, more than 600 Afghan government officials have studied at various universities in Japan and graduated. More than 540 of the officials have graduated with a PhD or a master's degree. And I'm very much proud to say that many of the peace graduates now gain important positions in the Afghanistan government and play key roles to manage self-reliant Afghan development and to create enabling environment for private investments. So, having introduced our experiences, my question to the panelists is, how can the government of Afghanistan best manage the dialogue between the government and the private sector to identify priorities of capacity development for creating enabling environment for private sector-led growth? Thank you. Over to you.
Very much, Your Excellency, for really important remarks and observations on the importance of capacity building for private sector-led growth. And that is at the heart of Japan's development and growth history, where Japan is the leader and again, famously known as a nation tiger. And again, your question posed to the panel is noted. With this, we move to the responder, the Afghan responder from the private sector, Mr. Hujjatullah Fazli, who is the CEO of Afghanistan's International Chamber of Commerce in Afghanistan. Your Excellency Fazli, the floor is yours. You have the floor if you are with us. Otherwise, we will try to get you later. Provided we have lost Mr. Fazli, we will try to reconnect with him at a later stage. And without further ado, perhaps I can call on the next responder from the United States International Development Finance Cooperation, DFC, Your Honorable Alison Minner, please. Do we have Ms. Minor on the platform? Perhaps we can move on. Mr. Fazli is trying to join. While he is trying to participate, perhaps we can save the time and move to check if Ms. Wagma Moment of IFC, Senior Country Officer in Afghanistan, is connected. Ms. Wagma? Ms. Wagma, are you connected?
Thank you, Kabiri Sahib. Can you hear and see me also?
Sure, please.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Kabiri Sahib, distinguished keynote speakers and panelists. Allow me to highlight the importance of coordination amongst development partners. In order to crowd in private capital, especially in such an environment and challenging markets such as Afghanistan, we should apply the MFD, Maximizing Finance for Development approach. Doing business in Afghanistan, as we have heard a lot today, has multiple risks: security risks, political risk due to uncertainties, operational risk, commercial risk, especially looking at new sectors. We should coordinate, collaborate, and complement each other's efforts, leveraging different tools to unlock and especially scale up private investments. We want to repeat our efforts in the energy sector. As you all know, we have developed gas-to-power plant, the Nazir IPP. It took us 5 years to develop the project, to make it bankable. Similarly, we have engaged in the solar sector, developing the largest solar IPP in Herat. And these efforts that we call upstream efforts, developing a project, developing a sector, we want to repeat in the logistics sector, in the agriculture, health, and housing sectors. And we invite development partners to join our efforts to address the risks of the private sector where possible, support through blended finance, co-financing, or in the energy sector, VGF, viability gap funding, to bring down the tariffs. We believe that instead of highly subsidizing one project, it would be more beneficial for the country to what we call sweeten the deal for multiple investors, and I'm looking forward to your cooperation on this. One comment to the central bank, Excellency Ahmadi, I want to congratulate you on your achievements. We believe that in order to scale up SME lending in the country, we need to develop a robust credit infrastructure. We are keen to work with you and other development partners to build on our past work on the collateral registry and public credit bureau, to add movable assets to the registry and allow for asset-based lending. And I'm within the time, and thank you so much.
For being on time and also with your valuable references to the agenda on the practical examples of PPP, as well as the call for blended financing and co-financing and applicability of those in Afghanistan. Perhaps our panelists could get into those. We move back to two of our previous responders, and that being Alison Minor from the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation. If you're connected, please make your observations.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Great. First, I want to thank the hosts and all the other responders and panelists for the very important remarks that have been made today. I want to start off by saying a few words about DFC. For those who aren't aware, we're a new U.S. agency that was created last year to leverage investment tools to promote private sector-led growth in low and middle-income countries across the globe. To do so, we were given significantly more resources, new tools, and greater flexibility, particularly in relation to U.S. company involvement, than our predecessor agency. Our tools include debt, equity investment, political risk insurance, and technical support for project development. DFC support is not grants. We invest in bankable, private sector-led projects that generate a return because we see that as essential to the sustainability of what we do. DFC is intended to serve as a complement to other U.S. assistance and economic support, such as USAID. We see our tools as critical in the journey to self-reliance described by Deputy Administrator Barsa. DFC actually has a whole office dedicated to projects that are done in coordination with USAID that provides a strong platform for the kind of blended finance approaches that were described earlier. In Afghanistan, DFC is committed to expanding our investment to support both projects that provide near-term benefits to the population, such as access to finance, as well as long-term investments in the economic backbone of the country, as well as key growth sectors that can help build on that backbone. I agree with our ADB colleagues on the essential nature of regional economic connectivity. So we're also working through multilateral platforms with Central and South Asian countries to support investments in that area. In addition to promoting Afghanistan's journey to self-reliance, we think that these investments, if strategically deployed, can provide a foundation for durable peace, the kind of peace economy that we heard from UNDP. Ultimately, DFC's work is dependent on our partners in Afghanistan, and they are just that, partners. We depend on private sector partners to develop proposals for high impact, high quality, and financially viable projects. We depend on our government counterparts to make reforms to improve the enabling environment and to promote other meaningful opportunities for private sector involvement, including through PPPs. I think it is extremely important that this event combines representatives from both assistance and development finance institutions, as effective development planning demands that we coordinate across these different tools. And I hope that we can continue to expand such opportunities and find ways to institutionalize them in the future. We want to ensure that DFI investments are targeted towards priority sectors and areas, and that they actually build off of the important efforts from ODA and other tools. We also want to ensure that we are leveraging the experience of other actors to mitigate any unintended consequences of our investments. With that, I'll conclude. Thank you for this event, and I look forward to working with our colleagues to action some of the recommendations that have been discussed.
Thank you very much for your observations and being a responder, and for the news on the resources that are available via DFC as a new emerging development partner to the private sector. Thank you very much, and I hope your observations are being noted by the panelists. At the same time, we are moving to our last but not least responder from the Afghan private sector, Hojatullah Fazli, the CEO of the International Chamber of Commerce. And with that, mindful of the time, we will be sharing the floor back to the panelists for their observations before we conclude. Mr. Fazli? Mr. Fazli, perhaps if the connection is not allowing this discussion to happen, perhaps Mr. Fazli can share his written comments via the chat box so we can pick it up and share it with the panelists. With this, mindful of the time allocated to us and the extended time given to us because of the delay, we are now moving back to the panelists in the same order as they presented earlier. So each of them could have 1 to 2 minutes to respond to the interventions and questions raised by the responders. And with that order, I call upon our colleague from the UNDP, Mr. Al-Dardari.
Is there a question? Sorry, Mr. Kabiri, I'm waiting for the question.
There were some responses and observations from the responders. If you may like to respond or share some observations on any of those agendas raised by the responders.
Mr. Kabiri, I think the ideas that we heard today are so rich that if we can compile them, they would produce an excellent annex even to the ANPDF. Especially what we said, what I said, and what all the other colleagues, distinguished speakers mentioned today could be a roadmap for a very detailed roadmap on the way forward for private sector led growth in Afghanistan. We are of the idea, and I think we all agree on these ideas, that there is no self-reliance without private sector leading growth in Afghanistan. There is no self-reliance without dramatic shift in quality of governance in national institutions. And there is no transformative move towards self-reliance in Afghanistan without creating the business environment necessary for the private sector. And last but not least, there is no transformation in Afghanistan without linking all of this to the Sustainable Development Goals, and ensuring that when we talk growth, we consider environment, and when we consider environment and growth, we talk of equity. If we manage to do this, and I'm proud to say UNDP has put forward, with the help of Biruni Institute, again, the tools that allow the government of Afghanistan to make those transformative decisions. Thank you very much for this tremendous opportunity.
Thank you very much, Mr. Al-Dardari of UNDP, for your observations. And now we perhaps leave it voluntarily to our distinguished panelists to perhaps raise their hands if they would like to respond to any of the observations from the responders. Or otherwise, I could perhaps, we have got on the list Jean-Louis of the EU, and followed by the World Bank. Jean-Louis, the floor is yours.
Thank you. No, thank you very much, and very quickly, because as it was said, the discussion has been extremely rich, so I will not add a lot. Just to insist a bit, perhaps it was not a question, but some issue that I'd like to insist on, to promote a positive regional role in peace and stability for Afghanistan, the role of the other neighbor countries in the peace process. I think connectivity and sustainable connectivity for Central Asia would be a key. Associating and connecting Afghanistan with the others is certainly a factor that would weight positively in the balance, be it on transport, on trade, on energy, environment. There are plenty of things that can be done, including on people to people. And in that sense, the women or the gender programs, Afghan women through education and training that we have organized with Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan is an example. Of course, it helps connectivity, and it further increases the role of women in Afghanistan. So we were just giving this as an example of how you can mix various elements. I'll stop here, and thank you again very much for this very, very interesting session. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now move to our panelist from the World Bank. Mr. Kerali, the floor is yours.
Yes, I want to acknowledge, first of all, the talk about mobilizing finance for development, because this is quite important. Working with the private sector does require support through what we call risk mitigation measures, in particular putting together packages for supporting their investments. We have, through the World Bank Group, the Multilateral Investment Guarantee that also provides political risk insurance. In addition, the International Development Association itself also provides guarantees for investors wishing to invest in Afghanistan. So assurances, mechanisms to give assurances to the private sector that as long as they take care of the business risks, we, as international development partners, particularly the World Bank Group, will provide guarantees that the investments that they put in Afghanistan will be safe from political risks, from even natural disasters to some extent, but not the business risk. That is something they have to take care of. So I just wanted to emphasize that, but also to reiterate that there is coordinated action on the part of development partners through the ARTF. We hope to receive tomorrow news of the amounts that various donors will be committing to Afghanistan, and we look forward to continue supporting Afghanistan in that way. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kerali. While the rest of our panelists could still share their observations, if I see them raise their hands, meanwhile, we will move to OECD's Bill Thompson for sharing his reactions.
There we go. Thank you very much for that. Minister, Governor, directors, colleagues, thank you for this opportunity. I first, on behalf of the OECD, do want to express our condolences for all those affected by the tragic and indefensible attacks that we saw this weekend. Since time is short, I will be very brief. First of all, I want to say one word of just praise for the government of Afghanistan. My program has been monitoring the response to the COVID pandemic across Central Asia quite systematically. And I have to say that we have found some of the measures taken by the Afghan authorities, particularly in respect of bread distribution, really basic support measures in the pandemic, innovative, and indeed they have excited interest in OECD partner countries across the world, which are struggling with the need to respond to this in conditions of limited state capacity and even state fragility. So I want to start with that just because it's been something we've told a number of countries about, that we learned about from our Afghan colleagues. Looking forward, OECD has been working for the last few years with Afghanistan on private sector development. I endorse what's been said about the need for a private sector development focused approach in the future. And for us in particular, our current work focuses on easing liquidity for private firms, revenue release, some immediate emergency measures, but looking to the longer term, we're working very hard with the authorities in our discussions of business formalization. Ultimately, for Afghanistan to flourish, we need not simply lots of entrepreneurs. It's an incredibly entrepreneurial culture. We need a population of growing companies. And informal firms, by definition, are limited by size. We need to create the conditions for investment, the business environment that will allow the entrepreneurial talent which we see everywhere to emerge into companies that are able to grow and invest. And we're working on streamlining procedures, support to human capital for managers, and so on. The other critical priority where we are trying to work with Afghanistan, and which we see as absolutely vital, is connectivity. Internal connectivity and regional connectivity, because this will create one of the necessary conditions for a growing private sector to succeed. I hope that's brief enough. I know time is short, but that's what I leave you with. Private sector development means successful companies, not just informal individuals and entrepreneurs, and connectivity is one of the key conditions we need to improve to make that happen, as well as the kind of institutional improvements, the business environment that have been discussed today. Thank you, Moderator. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, our distinguished colleague from the OECD, for your observations. And as we are wrapping up, the chances are still with the panelists, with the rest of them, if they would like to respond to any of the observations by the responders. Otherwise, there's also a question, perhaps anybody could pick it up, posed on the chat box, and that is being the importance of cash transfers. And the note reads, cash assistance is better than in-kind assistance and can also help fighting against corruption. With that single question or observation we have on the chat box, I call upon the panelists if they have any further observations, and then we will wrap up. I get a message from the World Bank's Kirali for the observations, followed by Manija Wafek, and then we will conclude.
Do have a program which we are calling REACH, which will provide cash transfers to the poorest households in Afghanistan. This will be part of the government's Dastakani Mili program. Once it is approved by Parliament, I don't know if that is the procedure, but nevertheless, we do fully agree that cash transfers do help the poorest families, because without that, families tend to resort to what we call very destructive methods of coping. For example, they pull their children out of school to be able to work, to provide them support, or they tend to dig into their reserves or savings and use that for day-to-day survival. So being able to provide cash transfers to the poorest is one of the best mechanisms to protect the development gains that we talked about earlier. Thank you.
Thank you very much, the World Bank, for sharing your reactions. And then we are moving to the very last observation from Ms. Manija Wafek of the Women's Chamber of Commerce, and that would be possibly 1 minute. as we are reaching the end of the program, and I will be sharing some final notes. Ms. Manija?
Yes, thank you. I think I would like to emphasize on the cash transfer, but at the same time, would like to emphasize on strict monitoring, because if we really want to prevent corruption, then we definitely need to do a very strict monitoring of it. And on the other side, I would like to make one last note on the banking system in Afghanistan. Our banking system needs a lot of reform, and as well as a lot of its services needs improvement. And sometimes for businesses, requirements are overly done, especially for international transfers. And the overly done requirements sometimes, again, brings everyone to do corruption in order to get their jobs done. So I would like the Governor Ahmadi to please give attention to the banking system as well in Afghanistan. Thank you.
Ms. Wafik, for your observation, and I'm at this stage thanking the organizers for their generosity with respect to the time, and with the support of my colleagues, if I may, I will be reading some quick outcome statements out of these discussions as a takeaway messages, and then we will perhaps, with your permission, dear distinguished panelists and keynote speakers, we would like to then conclude. On that note, we need to, I'm moving towards the very final takeaway notes shared with me by my counterparts and colleagues who are helping with the note taking, and that being number one. As many of our speakers have highlighted, ongoing conflict and COVID-19 have further challenged Afghanistan's economic growth and increased its dependency on foreign assistance. As we heard from UNDP's Assistant Secretary, the COVID-19 has set back the country by several years, and for the first time in 30 years, Afghanistan's human development indicators are in decline. And then again, on the importance of the principles of partnership and the new AFP document that will be emerging out of the Geneva Conference, our partners and colleagues in these discussions emphasize the need for country ownership, focus on results, inclusive partnership, and transparency and accountability. Multiple speakers spoke to the importance of aid coordination and the importance of knowing who is implementing what and where. And also Minister Argandiwal of the Finance noted that aid is not just about improving social indicators, but also about maintaining peace and stability in Afghanistan. Moving forward, our speakers collectively highlighted concerns about lack of coordination, fragmented implementation, and insufficiency, transparency, and corruption. There was also a significant focus by the speakers on the role of the private sector that can play in growth of Afghanistan's economy and support the idea of public-private partnership. And similar to that, if no further observations after my notes, I will have His Excellency Deputy Minister for Finance to possibly conclude, and I will be reading out the very last 2 bullet points we have as a takeaway note, and those are the messages by the USAID's Deputy Administrator, Mr. Barsa, urged on the collective commitment to market-based solutions and prioritizing the business enabling environment. And again, last but not the least, all the speakers in this discussion expressed the significant role that women must play in Afghanistan's economy, an essential need to preserve and advance the right of the women, children, and minorities. And lastly, on a number of cross-cutting themes that were discussed, and some key messages on the need of regional connectivity that could be a dividend for peace and stability in Afghanistan, and Afghanistan's geo-economic location connecting Central Asia to South Asia, and harnessing the potential or unlocking the potential of regional cooperation. With that, these are the notes from the discussions. We are now moving forward and over back to the dais for for concluding remarks by His Excellency Deputy Minister of Finance, Mr. Zadran.
Thank you so much, Kabiri Sahib. I won't be taking much time because our session has been already prolonged a bit. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished participants, let me thank you all the key speakers and the panelists for the productive discussions on Afghanistan economic priorities and how effective aid planning and partnership can move Afghanistan away from the donor dependence and towards greater self-reliance through the incorporation of private sector-led economic growth and regional connectivity into development plans for 2020 till 2024. I've collected a lot of key messages and important remarks by the panelists and our keynote speakers. I would especially appreciate the clear message from John Barsa of USAID about his positive remarks for the private sector development, especially the woman contribution in the private sector, and stating that corruption is really hindering the private sector's growth. This is what the government of Afghanistan is eco with. I would also like to appreciate the very strong and bold message by Ms. Veganaraja that we cannot afford to continue doing the same thing which we have been doing since the last many years. We have to apply the lessons which we learned. The rest of the remarks by the panelists I will cover in my concluding remarks. Especially we would be agreeing or very much welcome the findings and analysis of UNDP on the macro fiscal situation of Afghanistan and that what was presented by Mr. Henry Kennedy of the World Bank. And on our journey to self-reliance, the government of Afghanistan is planning to improve the revenue collection through investment in digitalization of the processes through synchronization of Afghanistan payment system. We are integrating our systems with the banks, with the central bank, that will be reducing the cash payments in our customs and in our revenue department. We have allocated a lot of our funds in our upcoming in a coming year budget for investment in eradicating the corruption in our custom departments. We have allocated almost $50 million to invest in our customs and revenue departments, which will facilitate the private sectors and will enable them to trade easily with our neighboring countries and to process their goods and equipment through our custom very quickly and easily. They will be able to process their tax clearances and business licenses very quickly in all the government departments. Furthermore, the government, through the financial support of the development partner, will finance the most economically viable projects to have higher returns, such as the investment will be made in extractive industry, agriculture, energy, transport, education and healthcare sector. We expect to have 5 to 7% GDP growth annually by investing in these sectors. In regard to harmonization, this was raised by some of our panelists. We are very much glad that the technical and financial support of the development partners are and we need to work closely with them to further improve our coordination, that the donors' aid should be aligned with the ANPDF-II and also increase the on-budget modality. We are committed to fight against corruption through digitalization of the government processes, asset registration of the senior government officials, and we welcome the development partners' recommendations to jointly agree on the mutual accountability framework, which will be further discussed tomorrow in the main event of the conference. We also welcome the World Bank Fiduciary Risk Assessment Review, which is being conducted by the ARTF project, which is helping us increase the transparency in the aid money that we are receiving. Furthermore, the incentive program with the World Bank and ARTF and the SRBC with the European Union are an excellent platforms for aid effectiveness, which we can work further together to improve the mechanism and to further attract the donor investment through these platforms. In regard to the immediate actions and reform priorities of the government and international partners, given the current COVID pandemic situation, the main priorities of the government is to attract the private sector to invest in extractive agribusiness, energy, transport, health and digital economy, and digital businesses. These are the areas which we have focused on in our ANPDF-II, and this was the question of one of our responders from JICA, that how we are discussing or engaging with the private sector. So far, the ANPDF-II have been discussed through several workshops with the private sectors, but that was just the planning phase. We will further be discussing or engaging with the private sector in the implementation phase as well. Market building is one of the three pillars of the NPDF-II, and our development strategic focus is on open, transparent, and competitive market. Thus, we developed the private sector development NPP to further strengthen the private sector role through direct investment and through PPP in different sectors, as was mentioned by the ADB, UNDP, and World Bank. The extractive industry, energy sector, especially hydropower, renewable energy, and coal power, agribusiness, information technology, health, and education are the main sectors that the private sector can invest in with a huge return. The formal information shows that annually around 1 billion is going out from Afghanistan for health health-related issues to our neighboring countries. So investment in the healthcare sector by the private sector can definitely keep this investment within the country. With the support of the development partners, we have created some platform where we can provide loans and credits to the micro, small, and medium businesses, thanks to World Bank for establishing the MISWA together with us. That is one of the excellent frameworks that we have created jointly, and so far we have supported a few hundreds of thousands of businesses. In addition, we have established the Afghan Credit Guarantee Facility, ACGF, that they ensure loans and credits of the banks, which Manija Wafik was referring to about the services by the banks. This will help the banking sector to extend their loans to the private sector. For the large investments, we need a strong support of the IFC, MEGA, private sector window of ADB, USAID, and other institutions to support the private sector through its transaction advisory support, guarantees, and through their technical assistance to attract the private sector to Afghanistan. In investment in the regional connectivity, Afghanistan is a hub between Central and South Asia, and it can be connected through rails, energy, gas pipelines, and fiber optic. This is also an excellent opportunity for the private sector to invest in these projects. The great examples are TAPI, CASA 1000, Digital CASA, and TOTAP. At the end, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to take this opportunity to thank our speakers, our panelists, our very efficient moderator who added to the conference experience. I would like to thank all staff for organizing this event and ensuring it ran so smoothly. Ladies and gentlemen, you have had a very long day today and have participated actively, and we are looking forward to meeting you in the tomorrow main event. I'll be reading out the concluding remarks from our today's meeting in the tomorrow main event as well. Looking forward to see you all tomorrow. Thank you so much, and have a good day ahead.
ماشی وسیل من دماری اونجا مسجد مکتب من پیش من عند کبار آمدیم سر سلک میگردیم یک کار کنیم اونجا حالا جنگ بود تو جنگ بود طالبا و پلیسا سر جنگ بود همین تو میگردیم در یک شو یک نان پیدا میکنیم پسی یک نان که نان بگیریم حتی چیز نخواهیم مکتب بخوانیم انجرار
کنفرانس افغانستان 23-24 نوامبر 2020 ژنوا. صلح، رفاه و خودکفایی.